Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to UCW. My name is Kristen Bussey, and I'm your board rep for this week. As many of you, I'm sure, don't recognize me or know me, I want to tell you a little bit about myself. I go by her, she, and I have two young children, 9 and 11, and a husband who is out of town with the older child enjoying a Scouts camping trip. So we do a lot of outdoor activity, which I'm sure a lot of you enjoy as well. So again, welcome to UCW today, and I want to call a couple of items to your attention for our announcements this morning. On the second page here, we have a list of the full announcements, but I just wanted to highlight number 9, and for individuals who would be able to join us for the Circle Round for Healing, honoring suicide loss, coming up on Wednesday at 6 p.m. here. And then as well, we would like to draw your attention to the meditation group changing the time on Wednesday, number 8 as well. And finally, not listed in the announcements today, but there is still room for anybody who is interested in joining us after the service today for some important safety training at the church. You're all welcome. There is additional space, plus lunch will be provided to make sure we're all fed and healthy. So finally, if you are new to UCW or visiting, Steve and I will be in the community room after the service to speak with us more, or you are welcome to send an email to visitor@uucw.org. That is visitor@uucw.org. And we would love to connect with you too.
Good morning. My name is Steve Frey. I'm a member of the worship ministry team, and I use the pronouns he, his, and him. This morning we have a special guest on video. Rica Kaufel was born and raised in Germany, graduated from Meadville Lombard, and until recently served as part-time minister at the Unitarian Universalist Church in Anaheim, California. This summer, she's moving back to Germany, where she is excited to serve the German Unitarians. She remains deeply invested in our denomination in the U.S., though, and has therefore recorded a couple of sermons for us to use. She hopes you'll receive the little love offering, as she calls it, with grace and joy. Welcome. Whoever you are, from wherever you come, you are welcome here. Whomever you love, however you define family, you are welcome. The identities you hold, how you want to be called, and your pronouns are respected and welcomed here. Whatever the color of your skin, the language your grandparents used, the cultures that move in your being, the abilities and disabilities you hold, we welcome you. Whatever you believe, whatever your theology or sacrament, even if none at all, we welcome you. We unite in Unitarian Universalist principles. We are a community of communities, spiritual seekers, taking action, called on by our religion to work for justice, united in covenant and the spirit of love. We welcome all of you.
Good morning, and thank you for having me today. I'm the Reverend Rica Kaufel, and I was born and raised in Germany. I came to the US when I was 20, and it is a special honor for me to talk to you today on the eve of this big American national holiday. In the lead up to today, my 11-year-old daughter Elise asked me what the 4th of July was all about. We talked a little bit about history and also about celebrating one's country, being proud of one's country. This made her think. She told me that there are some things she loves about the United States, about living here. But she said there are also many things that definitely do not make her proud. Where does that leave her on the 4th of July? Should she still celebrate it? But love, true, meaningful love, does not blindly uplift us. True, meaningful love is honest, even if the truth is hard to hold or unacceptable. And true, meaningful love then helps us to right the wrongs, to become better. So today, in the spirit of true, meaningful love for this country and love for each other, let's honor each other's truths. Let's uplift each other, knowing that a just and faithful tomorrow begins here, in our hearts, our shared convictions, and our dedication to justice and love, and through the shared work of hands to make these manifest in our community, in this country, and in the world. Let us worship together.
And now for the chalice lighting. A Community of Faith by Reverend Judith L. Quarles. Please read along, and if you're joining us at home, feel free to kindle your chalice or candle. At this hour, in small towns and big cities, in single rooms and ornate sanctuaries, many of our sibling Unitarian Universalist congregations are also lighting a flaming chalice. As we light our chalice today, let us remember that we are part of a great community of faith. May this dancing flame inspire us all to fill our lives with Unitarian Universalist ideals of love, justice, and truth.
Let's take a moment to get comfortable in our seats. Feet on the floor, just relax. Take a breath. Let it go. The meditation that I chose this morning is one I've used before. It was sent to me by a friend. He titled it 6 Little Stories. I just added the with lots of meaning. Once, all villagers decided to pray for rain. On the day of prayer, all the people gathered, but only one boy came with an umbrella. That is faith. When you throw babies in the air, they laugh because they know you will catch them. That is trust. Every night we go to bed without any assurance of being alive the next morning. But still, we set the alarm to wake us up. That is hope. We plan big things for tomorrow in spite of zero knowledge of the future. That is confidence. We see the world suffering, but still, we get married and we have children. That is love. On an old man's shirt was written a sentence, "I am not 80 years old. I am sweet 16 with 64 years of experience." That is attitude. Friends, have a happy day. Live your life like those 6 stories. Remember, good friends are the rare jewels of life, difficult to find and impossible to replace.
Do I look there or look there? Okay. Okay. My name is Alexa Ann Watson, and I am the great-great-great-granddaughter of Frederick
Douglass is my
I am the great-great-great-granddaughter of Frederick Douglass.
I am the great-great-great-grandchild.
I've been counting on my fingers since I was like 5.
Whenever you're ready, here we go.
This is the 4th of July. It is the birthday of your national independence and of your political freedom.
Fellow citizens, I shall not presume to dwell at length on the associations that cluster about this day. The simple story of it is that 76 years ago, the people of this country were British subjects.
Oppression makes a wise man mad. Your fathers were wise men, and if they did not go mad, they became restive under this treatment.
With brave men, there's always a remedy for oppression.
They succeeded, and today you reap the fruits of their success. The freedom gained is yours, and you, therefore, may properly celebrate this anniversary.
Fellow citizens, pardon me. Allow me to ask, why am I called upon to speak here today? What have I, or those I represent, to do with your national independence?
Are the great principles of political freedom and of natural justice embodied in that Declaration of Independence extended to us?
I am not included within the pale of this glorious anniversary.
Your high independence only reveals the immeasurable distance between us. The blessings in which you this day rejoice are not enjoyed in common.
The rich inheritance of justice, liberty, prosperity, and independence bequeathed by your fathers is shared by you, not by me.
The sunlight that brought life and healing to you has brought stripes and death to me.
This 4th of July is yours, not mine.
You may rejoice, I must mourn.
Fellow citizens, above your national tumultuous joy, I hear the mournful wail of millions.
At a time like this, scorching irony, not convincing argument is needed.
Oh, had I the ability and could reach the nation's ear, I would today pour out a fiery stream of biting ridicule, blasting reproach, withering sarcasm, and stern rebuke.
For it is not light that is needed, but fire.
It is not the gentle shower, but thunder.
We need the storm, the whirlwind, and the earthquake.
The feeling of the nation must be quickened.
The conscience of the nation must be roused.
The propriety of the nation must be startled.
The hypocrisy of the nation must be exposed.
And its crimes against God and man must be proclaimed and denounced.
What to the American slave is your 4th of July? I answer, a day that reveals to him, more than all other days in the year, the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is the constant victim.
To him, your celebration is a sham.
Your boasted liberty an unholy license.
Your national greatness, swelling vanity.
Your sounds of rejoicing are empty and heartless.
Your denunciations of tyrants, brass-fronted impudence.
Your shouts of liberty and equality, hollow mockery.
Your prayers and hymns, your sermons and thanksgivings,
With all your religious parade and solemnity, are to him
Mere bombast.
Fraud.
deception,
Impiety.
and hypocrisy. There is not a nation on the earth guilty of practices more shocking and bloody than are the people of these United States at this very hour. Allow me to say in conclusion, notwithstanding the dark picture I have this day presented of the state of the nation, I do not despair of this country.
This speech was written almost 170 years ago, but this part of it is still extremely relevant, especially with today's protests.
I think that when people are oppressed, they feel silenced, and if someone feels silenced, they get angry. There are certain tactics that you need to use to get people to really hear your voice, and it's not always going to be just like a very calm discussion.
I think he's mostly talking to the people who are already on his side, but believe that they can still try to talk this out, or that things are still justifiable. I know a lot of people at the time were saying, and people now are still saying, that it's not as bad as it could be.
While the 4th of July probably does not feel the same to me as it does to others, I wouldn't say that it has no meaning, because it is the time when America as a country became free from another country. But I would say that it's not the time in which I gained my freedom.
He had a lot of hope, especially for his age. And I'm getting to the point in my life where I'm only 20 years old, but I'm exhausted. I have these thoughts like, will we ever really get to this point? Or is this really something that we should actually spend our time fighting for?
Somebody once said that pessimism is a tool of white oppression, and I think that's true. I think in many ways we are still slaves to the notion that it will never get better. But I think that there is hope, and I think it's important that we celebrate Black joy and Black life, and we remember that change is possible, change is probable, and that there's hope.
I moved from Germany to the US for college when I was 20 years old. It was my great adventure. And I always thought I was the first person in my family to visit the US, let alone live here. My parents hadn't been before I moved here, and neither had my grandparents. Or so I thought. I mentioned this once to Tante Gerdi, my Aunt Gertie, my grandmother's younger sister, and she said, oh, but that's not true. Uncle Kurt spent 11 months in Nebraska. Uncle Kurt was her husband and had been my grandfather's best friend since they were young. He collected minerals, which he even let me play with very carefully when I was growing up, and he always had blackberry gumdrops for me in his shirt pocket whenever I came to visit. He also lived in East Germany until the wall fell. So however he made it to the US for 11 months to Nebraska, of all places, was a mystery to me. Tante Gertie was quick to clear this up for me. Though highly critical of Hitler's regime, Uncle Kurt was drafted as soon as World War II started and stationed in Italy. There, he was captured by American soldiers and brought to the US as a prisoner of war. He was sent to labor on a farm in Nebraska. Now, by the time I found out about this, he had already died, so I never got to hear his recollection of that time. But according to Tante Gertie, he remembered this time quite fondly. Yes, the work on the farm was hard, but the meals were hearty and plentiful. The beds in the barracks where he and the other German prisoners slept were warm and comfortable, and the farmer's family on whose farm they worked was friendly and welcoming. They had evenings and Sundays off, and during his free time, Uncle Kurt took drawing classes where he created pictures of exotic animals and birds. This was in stark contrast to the other relatives who were prisoners of war. My Uncle Max, for example, was sent to France, where the German soldiers were not even given houses, having to live in cold, wet trenches until they built some raggedy huts themselves. Now, don't get me wrong. I know what Germany did in the war. I understand that the French were not at all inclined to make the lives of prisoners of war comfortable in any way. I understand that. But for that very reason, I was even more surprised to hear how well my Uncle Kurt was treated. In fact, Tante Gertie, mother of an infant in East Berlin, tried her hardest after the war to save enough of their small daily provisions to send care packages with some chocolate, some tobacco to her husband, until he wrote back to her that this was not necessary at all. Not only did they have chocolate and tobacco on the farm, but the quality of either was also much better. I was surprised and I was grateful because I loved my Uncle Kurt very much, and because he was never a supporter of Hitler and his regime, but instead found himself drafted into a war he never wanted. In fact, Uncle Kurt's story made me love the US, this country I myself had moved to at a young age, even more. Interestingly, though, the few people here to whom I told this story were just as confused as me. They had never heard about German prisoners of war in the US. It made me wonder if my uncle's story was an isolated case, a rare occurrence. But that notion is actually far from the truth. A couple of years ago, while listening to Radiolab, one of my favorite podcasts, Jad Abumrad and Robert Krulwich, the hosts of the show back then, shone some light on this story in an episode entitled Nazi Summer Camp. Apparently, towards the end of World War II, there were almost 500,000 prisoners of war in the US, mostly German, but also some Japanese and some Italian soldiers. They were located in every single state except for Vermont, sometimes housed in tent cities or churches or high school gyms and even rodeo grounds until more suitable accommodations could be built. There were over 200 base camps, some of them housing up to 8,000 prisoners. And life in these camps was not bad. People had plenty of food. In fact, they were given so much food that in some cases they could not even finish it all. Though hard work was required, the prisoners were also treated well. And during times off, there was even entertainment. Prisoners were given musical instruments. They formed orchestras. There were pottery classes, or in the case of my Uncle Kurt, drawing classes. Of course, not everybody was happy with that. There were people in the population and in the media who were quite enraged about this from the very start. They were enraged about the cushy life enemy soldiers who were killing the sons of American families in the war abroad were provided with. After all, the war took a toll on America as well. But despite growing criticism, the US government held on to their treatment of enemy prisoners of war. The Geneva Conventions had just been signed a little over 10 years before, stating that prisoners of war should be given the same rations and treatments as the soldiers of one's own military. The US abided by these conventions, determined that there should not be a repeat of the gruesomeness of World War I. But of course, we now know that World War I's gruesomeness was to be overshadowed. We know that Germany did not abide by any laws and conventions. This became clear when US soldiers discovered German prisoner of war camps for American soldiers who were treated cruelly, violently, and who were even killed, massacred after surrender. That Germany did not follow any laws or conventions became even more clear when the concentration camps were discovered. At this point, resources in the US were becoming scarce. Also, in the camps hosting German soldiers, the relative freedom allowed the convinced Nazis, those who were not simply drafted but who followed Hitler willingly and enthusiastically, to organize themselves, perpetuate their ideologies, and bully prisoners like my Uncle Kurt, who did not share their convictions. All of this led to a renewed debate about how many of the scarce resources should be spent on such deplorable people. Should you be fair and humane to those who showed such a disregard for humanity? When push came to shove, there was a vote in Congress, and Congress voted to keep upholding the Geneva Conventions, to keep treating the German prisoners decently. Not only did they say that they didn't want to sink to the same level of Nazis, they didn't even want to use Nazis as a standard or a measurement. They decided to stick to their own standards, their own American ideals. And because of that, my Uncle Kurt, with his blackberry gumdrops and his mineral collection, did not have to suffer. And after some time, he returned safely home to his wife and his infant daughter. When my own young daughter asks me, what parts of America do I love? This is one of the stories that I tell her. I do think the choice to keep prisoners in humane circumstances, to treat them well, was a choice well made. I don't think it was an easy choice. Upholding one's ideals is often not. Choosing to hold on to one's goodness when faced with such evil is not easy. But I think it was right, and it fills me with gratitude. But of course, we also know that during that time, not only good choices were made, because these camps were not the only camps. There were also internment camps where over 100,000 people of Japanese ancestry, the majority of them American citizens, were housed after they were yanked out of their lives simply because their background made them seem like a threat. And the conditions in these camps, sparsely erected wooden buildings that did not keep out the cold, the wind, sometimes even the rain, where up to 25 people were crammed into rooms designed for 4, where there was often no plumbing, these conditions were bad. Food was scarce and of low quality, lives were destroyed, and harm was done. The ruptures in families and the psychological damage that was done carried forth into the next generations as well. And the harm that was done in these camps was done to civilians, mothers and fathers and children, grandfathers and grandmothers. People like you and me, people who did not fire at American sons on the battlefield, and who did not commit genocide. And of course, all of this also happened long before the civil rights movement, when segregation was still rampant in many parts of the US, including the military. I'm so grateful that my Uncle Kurt was treated so kindly. And also, the US treated Nazi soldiers better than many of its own citizens. Both of this is true. It is undeniable that racism played a part in this. What this shows is something that also became quite apparent again in recent years, that in many parts of America, a white life counts more than the life of a person of color, even if the white life is a Nazi soldier or sympathizer. Holding the hard truth is also an act of love. It's also an act of patriotism. Now, in the podcast that I mentioned, the hosts also bring up racism, but in addition, they quote Paul Springer, a military historian who raises another reason, not one to replace racism as an explanation for this grave and unjust discrepancy in treatment, but to add to it. He says that one of the main differences was that there were clear rules governing international law, like the Geneva Conventions, when it came to the treatment of prisoners of war. The same was not true for American citizens. In fact, even Japanese soldiers who became prisoners of war were treated far better than the American civilians of Japanese ancestry in the internment camps. For them, there were no clear rules. They were in a weird gray zone outside of the law. I say that this explanation is an addition to that of racism because I think the two go hand in hand. Within systemic racism, having rules applied to you, laws work in your favor, is not a basic right, but a privilege that not everyone enjoys. We have seen this time and time again. We have seen this when, after 9/11, the Bush administration announced that people suspected of sympathizing with Al-Qaeda were terrorists, not prisoners of war, and therefore the Geneva Conventions did not apply, leading to the infamous camps of Guantanamo Bay. To this day, out of the 780 prisoners who were taken to Guantanamo Bay, 37 detainees still remain at the camp. They have been held there for nearly 2 decades without a trial. And we have also seen this when the Trump administration decided that the rights usually guaranteed to asylum seekers do not apply at the southern border, separating children from their parents, holding people in dehumanizing and cruel conditions, and making a mockery of legal procedure when 3-year-old children were asked to make a case in front of immigration judges. We have seen this when the Chinese Exclusion Act was passed in 1882, a law severely restricting immigration to the US, the first law to suddenly do so for one specific group after centuries of Europeans freely and legally entering the US to start new lives here. We see this every time the police violates people of color, especially Black people, employing measures of drastic and even fatal violence for minor infractions or for even just existing, with often little to no legal consequences for the officers. And of course, we see this in Frederick Douglass's moving and profound speech, in which he makes the point that the ideals and values of the Declaration of Independence, with its grand opening promise that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men, that all people are created equal, does not, in fact, leave any room for enslavement of human beings. Douglass here does not attack the Declaration of Independence or the values it espouses. What he decries and condemns, though, is the fact that its guarantees are not equally applied to every person in the US. He says, in that instrument, the Declaration of Independence, I hold there is neither warrant, license, nor sanction of the hateful thing, but interpreted as it ought to be interpreted, the Constitution is a glorious liberty document. Read its preamble, consider its purposes. Is slavery among them? Is it a gateway? Or is it in the temple? It is neither. Douglass does not take issue with the American ideals, but with the inconsistencies of their application. And it is these inconsistencies precisely that have and still do create systems of oppression and of structural racism. What I love about this country is that there are ideals and laws and promises that allowed for my Uncle Kurt, an enemy soldier, to be treated decently and fairly. What breaks my heart and fills me not just with despair and anger, but also the urgent need to work for change, is the fact that the very same ideals, laws, and promises are not fulfilled in the same way for Black, Indigenous, and people of color in the US. On the 4th of July, we celebrate American independence and what it promises. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Maybe for some of you, these sentences and what they imply are part of what you love about the US. I also think they are good rules to live by as a country. These sentences are a good underlying foundation for all other laws and rules we may come up with. And maybe it is now time, maybe the act of patriotism, of love for our country that is so direly needed, is to stop viewing these sentences as just the ideals that the country was founded on and that we might aspire to, but as binding rights and promises and a resulting duty for all of us, for all Americans, to make sure that they are applied equally and consistently to all. May it be so, and blessed be.
Good morning. I'm Kathy Herwig. My pronouns are she and hers. UUCW's Split the Plate program is one of outreach and generosity. Each month we give half of all undesignated offerings to a nonprofit organization to help us live our Unitarian Universalist values and serve our community. Our Split the Plate partner for June through mid-July, is Worthy Now Prison Ministry, which operates within the UUA's Church of the Larger Fellowship, or CLF. CLF is a UU congregation without walls, connecting people all over the world via the internet for spiritual growth. The Worthy Now Prison Ministry serves more than 1,500 incarcerated people who identify as UUs. 28 of those people are incarcerated in Wisconsin. Most learned about Unitarian Universalism from others who are incarcerated. Interested persons take an Introduction to Unitarian Universalism correspondence course, and upon completion of that course, they receive a variety of publications, including UU World Magazine and the Worthy Now newsletter. Worthy Now members can also choose from a number of other publications and correspondence courses throughout the year. These classes cover such topics as the prison industrial complex, anti-racism, anti-oppression, and compassionate communication. There is, of course, no cost to any incarcerated person for any of the services or publications. Worthy Now relies heavily on the donations of Free World members, grants, and Split the Plate contributions. A basket will be coming to those who are present in person today. If you are participating virtually, that doesn't mean you can't participate. You can go to the UUCW website's Donate tab and select Split the Plate from the menu provided. Or you can text or mail your donation today using the information found here. Today, I thank you for your generosity to Worthy Now.
In the 1950s, grappling with patriotism and his country after World War II, the German poet Bertolt Brecht wrote the Children's Hymn, an alternative national anthem for a new Germany he was envisioning. I want to leave you today with the last stanza of that hymn. And because we'll make it better, let us guard and love our home. Love it as our dearest country, as the others love their own. May it be so. Happy 4th of July, and blessed be.
One final announcement, and that is don't forget about the picnic at the end of the month celebrating Reverend Denise.